Hello everyone and welcome back to another Fate video. Today, we will be concluding this long journey of assessment to finally dub who the best characters in Fate are in the 5-star category. I mentioned this in the previous video, which if you haven't seen, you should go check out after this. That this will be a best-in-class showcase, meaning that rather than just have 5 casters on this list, we're going to give some breathing room for the other classes because yes, we all know the supports in the game are very broken. Like, if you want a genuine top 10 5-star servants, it's all going to be the supports, no exceptions, and there's really no fun in that. We're talking showmanship, baby. We will be evaluating these characters as we have all of the others. We are assuming 10, 10, 10, and NP1, and that you own this servant. Meaning that if you have a certain servant that is able to loop really easily in, say, a double Scotty setup, it doesn't matter if you don't own your own Scotty. People really hate this rule, but it needs to be taken into consideration because otherwise we're really just making assumptions. I will mention, however, if a servant is good for looping or not, so that we're keeping this clear-cut, JP-friendly, and civil. Savvy? Sick. Let's get started. Starting off with sabers, I have asked around about this on my Discord and YouTube comments, and a lot of people think that Artoria is number 1. I kind of get the hype in a double Konyaskaya setup, but even then I think my number 1 pick remains the same. I believe that the current best 5-star saber is Senji Muramasa. He is a ridiculously powerful AoE art servant who can throw his weight around and then some, continuing the long line of Shiro faces either being amazing or awful. But let's take a closer look at his skills. His first skill is a 1-turn buff to his Arts, Buster, and Quick cards for 50%, a 1000% Star Absorb, and a 15-star Star Bomb, all on a 5-turn cooldown. This skill is insanely powerful, essentially guaranteeing a turn of insane damage, the drawback being that this effect is only up for 1 turn on a very long cooldown. His second skill is an Ignore Invincibility that further increases his critical damage against characters using Evade or Invincible by 100% for 1 turn, but the skill keeps going, increasing his star generation by 100% for 3 turns, and his normal crit damage by 100% for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. This skill gives him 200% crit damage against anyone who's trying to avoid him on the turn it is active. And a self-buff for 100% crit damage and star generation that lasts for 3 turns is just insane. His final skill is a 50% NP battery which applies the Blaze status to him. What this does is increases his NP by 10% every time he normal attacks for 3 turns. This skill plays beautifully into his NP. It is an AoE arts that increases his NP damage by 10%, increases his arts damage by 10% at minimum, and it removes the enemy's offensive buffs first, then deals damage that ignores defense to all the enemies. He also has some passives that are worth mentioning as well, as they are unique to him. He has one that increases the party's crit damage by a flat 5% while he's on the field, and he will also deal a bonus 20% bonus damage to king-type enemies. Muramasa is one of the few servants who can loop his NP with almost no help at all. His skills, which are all devastatingly broken for the most part, all work towards the same goal. Hit hard with your crits, get your NP, kill whoever is in front of you, and then start over and do it again. He hits like a tank on steroids and can keep doing it. Legitimately, if you have him, you don't need double Castoria. Budget supports to assist his NP gain or crit star generation work just as well for him. He is able to fire off his nuke of an NP consistently thanks to his kit. He is not perfect, however, and suffers from 2 weaknesses. First off, he has no survivability. No evade, no guts, nothing. So, you may want to keep someone around who can protect him, or just use your mystic codes for the job. 2. His cooldowns can be rough. When he is up, he is really up, but when they are down, he's just fine. The fact that his first skill is on a 5-turn cooldown is a huge cut to his damage output and star gathering, and while his other 2 skills are both active for 3 turns, they then have 3 turns of downtime before they can be used again. Mind you, a friend's Tamamo completely trivializes this, but it is still worth mentioning. Outside of that, he is a completely broken servant. And there are a lot of times you won't even reach that turn 4 with him as your DPS because he's already cleared the waves even outside of farming. He is ridiculous and should be on everyone on NA's radar right after Castoria. The Archer class is somewhat difficult, and I do have a personal bias. Once again, it's Artoria, but this time with a squirt gun. While I love her ability to be able to fire off her NP over and over, I still don't think she's the best archer. Nah, that falls to the bear himself, Super Orion. Honestly, the Archer class has a lot of top contenders in every rarity, because Ishtar is also an extremely powerful unit, but Orion stands well and above all of them in my opinion. Being a former Grand Servant, you would imagine he's packing some heat, and believe you me, he is. His first skill is a 50% buster buff, then an additional 50% damage buff against wild beasts and demonic enemies on a 5-turn cooldown. In all honesty, the second part of the skill is pretty niche, but a 50% buster buff on a character with 3 built into his deck is phenomenal. When the second part does pop up though, it's great. His second skill gives him a guts for 1 time for 3 turns that will res him with 3000 HP. It also increases his attack by 20% for 3 turns and has a 20-star star bomb, a very nice piece of utility for survivability, attack, and stars on demand. Finally, we have his broken skill. This skill gives him a 500% star absorb and a buff on attack that activates first, which increases the critical damage on his buster cards by 100% for 3 attacks for 3 turns. What this means is that in the event that you have a Buster Brave Chain and are able to crit with the last one, you could break an enemy's break bar in some fights. In the event that the Bear hits all 3 crits on his 3 Buster cards, he is able to put out over 1,000,000 damage in 1 turn without using his NP. No, you used that the turn before because it's equally as broken. It is a personal buff that grants him Ignore Invincibility for 3 turns, increases his attack by 30% for 3 turns, debuff immunity for 3 turns, 10 stars every turn for 3 turns, and at worst a 100% crit buff for 3 turns. At best, at OC5, it is a 3-turn 200% crit buff. This is one of the best Noble Phantasms in the game, and it pairs perfectly with his kit. Now, you would think that being a unit with a triple buster deck would prevent him from using this too often. Wrong. His NP gain rate makes up for this, plus the additional 5 hits on his extra cards help out as well. As if he wasn't critting enough already, he has Independent Action EX, giving him a passive 12% crit buff. Orion is insanely powerful. End of story. He is a character that really doesn't have off turns if played correctly, and the way to play him correctly is you feed him stars and watch him get strangled. He is a rare case in FGO of being nearly perfect as a servant. If he had an evade, he would be flawless easily. His cooldowns hardly matter as well, as all you need to do is make sure he's critting, which is easy. He plays nice with the budget supports like Hans, and very nice with friend characters who can bump his damage. Actually, a rare servant suggestion from me would be Shakespeare or Leonidas, both of whom can help him get his buster damage up. Shakespeare can help him out with the NP, and Leonidas can help him get stars. I struggle to find real flaws with Orion, and the bonus damage he takes from poison is not it. He's a beast and should be a priority for you if you want a 5-star archer. Onto the Lancers, we have Melusine. This servant is one of a kind and a pioneer in terms of designs for characters in a way that I genuinely hope we see more of. She is an absolutely ludicrous servant for both her versatility and power. But let's take a look. Her first skill is an attack up for 40%, a 500 point damage reduction, a 2000 HP increase all for 3 turns, and a 30% NP battery all on a 6-turn cooldown. A solid skill that genuinely does a lot. Her second skill is a 5000% crit star gather rate for 3 turns, a 10-star star generated for 3 turns, and a 10-star star bomb all on a 5-turn cooldown. This kind of star absorb is usually reserved for berserkers who have terrible natural star absorption. However, the Lancer class is on the high end of that spectrum, so this more or less guarantees that if stars exist on the field while this is active, they are hers. Before we get to her third skill, let's address her NP, because she has 2 of them. If she is in her first or second Ascension forms, her NP is a 5-hit single target arts hit that increases the enemy's damage taken by 1000 for 5 turns, creates 10 stars, and at worst gives her a bonus 20% NP generation rate up for 3 turns. This is a very powerful single target NP, more or less a better one than normal Saber Lancelot's. But then for her third Ascension, this changes. Her NP becomes an AoE buster that ignores invincibility, increases her buster damage by 20% at worst, and then burns the enemy for 1000 damage every turn for 5 turns. Now, the fact that she has 2 NPs, both of which are very good, is phenomenal, but it gets better. Her third skill, while in her first and second Ascension, is a 100% NP battery, 1 turn of invincibility, and it flips her to her third Ascension. If you choose to use this on her third Ascension, it grants the 1 turn of invincibility, but rather than an NP battery, gives her 30% NP damage up. Melusine is a Swiss Army knife of a character, able to fill the role of a single target Lancer and an AoE one, and be incredibly powerful in both of these roles. Her third skill allows for her to have a very powerful playstyle as well. You can hold off on using it until absolutely necessary, and then firing it off to clear a wave. Or you can retain being a single target lancer for the whole fight and switch right when you need a pure burst of damage. The possibilities that her kit offers are astounding. She fits into the role of being a DPS crit servant and she excels at it. Her second skill is amazing and her first skill allows for her to dish out consistent damage. This for me is a big part of how she should be played. You want her to hit hard, and whether this is done by spamming out her NP or through great crits is up to you. Her abilities are open enough that she can fill into multiple different scenarios. She is amazing, and I hope we see this kind of design implemented in the future. Like, seriously, this is the type of design that you use to fix Jekyll and Hyde. Please let's see that. The 5-star riders are unfortunately fairly boring, either relegated to being AoE farmers or decent single target units, so to stand out amongst the mediocrity is key here. Let me crush some hopes and dreams real quick. It's not Reyna's. Though she is absolutely an amazing servant, she needs some work. It's not Ket's either. I believe that due to his buffs, Ozzy is the best rider. Ozzy's first skill is a buffed charisma, increasing the party's attack by 20% for 3 turns, and if the battlefield has sunlight, 10 crit stars and a party-wide critical damage up for 30% for 3 turns, all on a 5-turn cooldown. His second skill is Imperial Privilege, which grants him a number of personal buffs with a 60% chance of proccing. These buffs are a 40% attack up for 3 turns, a 40% defense up for 3 turns, and a 3000 HP heal that is guaranteed, all on a 5-turn cooldown. This skill's random nature can be alleviated, however, by his third skill, which is a party-wide 20% NP battery and a 40% buff success rate up for 1 turn on a 6-turn cooldown. It is worth pointing out that this 20% battery for the party is not skill level reliant, as opposed to say Helena or Asclepius, who you have to level to get the full 20% out of. Ozzy's NP is a single target buster NP that seals the enemy's NP, grants the sunlight status for 5 turns, reduces his cooldowns by 1, and decreases the enemy's defense by 20% at worst. Ozzy's ability to now self-sustain is fantastic. He can provide the sunlight he so desperately needs to get all of the effects out of his first skill. His ability to assist his team is also great with the battery and buff success rate up, making him a decent pair with Caesar actually, who can make him stars and increase Ozzy's crit damage. Meanwhile, Ozzy makes it so Caesar's NP can hit all of its stacks. In all honesty, his NP does not hit very hard, but the bonus effects are really what you want off of it. The Sunlight Flip, NP Seal, and Defense Down are all great, the damage is just a bonus really. Ozzy's one major weakness is his lack of hard defense, which he can somewhat alleviate through the use of his second skill, but honestly aside from that, he's an overall amazing unit. Now onto the one that you've all been waiting for, or have skipped ahead to, the Caster class. Without a doubt, the most broken class in the game. The casters are the most powerful units not because of their own destructive abilities, but from what they can pull out of others. The casters allow for the ever-coveted looping to quickly clear through waves and trivialize farming. So, with all of this pressure as to who the best is, it has to be Izumo no Okuni. Let me explain. I'm lying to you. Let me run you through the process of eliminations that led me to my conclusion of to who the best actually is. For one, it's not a DPS caster because of how broken the supports are. It can't possibly be one. So that leaves us with Skadi, Tamamo, Merlin, Waver, Castoria, and Crane. Next, I have to ask how powerful they are as a support, and if you would use them over the others, leaving me with Skadi, Merlin, Waver, and Castoria. Sorry, Crane. Next, how strong is the card type that they specialize in? Cutting Skadi from the equation as Quick is absolutely the worst. Merlin is great for a defensive option, but outside of buster teams or stall teams, he's just fine, so he's gone. So we are now left between Castoria and Waver. In terms of sheer usability, Waver wins out for being able to be put into more teams and work, even being a staple in many of the same looping teams that all the other supports are a part of. But for all-around content, I believe that Caster Artoria wins out overall. This is because she plays a hybrid role between Merlin and Waver, but for art servants. While buster memes are certainly eternal, Arts is the most widely usable type in the game, and almost every servant type can benefit from having their art cards enhanced. But let's take a look into what makes her so good. Her first skill is a 20% attack up for 3 turns and a 30% NP battery on a 6-turn cooldown. This is a better version of Merlin's first skill, but with one more turn of cooldown. Her second skill is a targetable 20% NP battery with an additional 30% NP generation buff for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. Regardless of your class type, this is a powerful skill. Finally, her third skill is a 50% art buff and a 50% buff to threat to humanity enemies, both for 3 turns and also a turn of invincibility, all on a 6-turn cooldown. She also has some very unique as well as powerful passives that are worth mentioning. Mind you, one of them is unlocked only after beating Lost Belt 6. These passives are Territory Creation EX, which is a passive 12% arts buff to her. Continuing this trend is a skill called One's Own Magic, which increases just her arts card's damage by 10% for her. Her other unique passive is which increases her critical attack chance and resistance by 20%. She has another passive in Magic Resistance A, which increases her debuff resistance by 20%. In terms of passive, they are all incredibly broken on her and help her to get her NP up and survive longer and tougher fights. Speaking of, her NP is incredible. A 30% attack buff for 3 turns, party-wide debuff removal, and a unique invincibility called Anti-Purge Defense, which is a guaranteed protection from at least one attack at OC1. But has the potential to stack up to 5 times at OC5, lasting for 3 turns. Note that in an interview, it was stated that at this time there are no plans to implement an ignore anti-purge type of gimmick because at that point it just becomes excessive. Meaning that if you want to break through this, you've either got to hit them for that amount of stacks, or you have to use a defense removing NP or skill like Abby's, which are fairly rare. Castoria offers an incredible amount of utility to her team. If you are using an arts unit and her skills and NP all just popped, you offer 100% in attack buffs for their arts cards, 50% on their others, and grant them all insane NP generation, 50% NP charge, solid defense, debuff removal, everything. So on her own, she's already insanely powerful. But when she becomes game breaking is when you use 2 of her with an arts unit. Honestly, it doesn't even have to be an arts unit. She enables units to be able to spam out their NP continuously and put out monstrous amounts of damage in the process. She stands out among the 5-star casters as being the most versatile and powerful in her niche. She is incredible and can be brought along to pretty much any content in the game. Castoria is worth saving for and worth the hype. If you haven't already on NA, start saving. On to the assassins, we have the thick Fox Konyaskaya. We have once again been blessed by the god that is Wada Arco with one of the best final ascension arts in the game, and she's packing more heat than a James Bond arsenal. She is what happens when you see Merlin and think to yourself, nah, it's not enough. Break him more. We haven't released a 5-star assassin in over 2 years, so make it that. Let's look at what she brings to the table. Her first skill is a targetable 50% NP battery that also reduces skill cooldowns by 2 turns with the demerit that it inflicts 1000 damage to the party without killing them on an 8-turn cooldown. This skill is exceptionally broken and is reminiscent of Scotty's 3rd skill, but with 2 more turns of cooldown. Honestly, the long cooldown does not matter for her because of how she is meant to be played, but we'll get into that here in a bit. Her second skill is a targetable buff that increases damage against human enemies for 50%, man enemies for 50%, and a special buff that increases the target's NP by 10% every time they use a buster card. All of these for 3 turns, and to top it all off, it creates 20 stars. All on a 6-turn cooldown. This skill is insane mostly for the NP charge on the buster cards, but everything else that comes with it is very nice. In truth, the human trait is reserved almost entirely for enemy mob units, which can be put to use in this context because of how you'll be wanting to use Konyaskaya. The man attribute is a bit more extensive, being any servant or mobs who originate as people. Combine all of this into one insane steroid and you have one disgusting skill on a short cooldown. Her third skill is a targetable 50% buster buff, a 50% buster crit damage increase, and a 5000% star absorb rate only on the buster cards, all of this for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. This skill is absurdly powerful for buster units, and even better for those who have trouble utilizing stars like berserkers. She has 2 unique passives that are worth mentioning. Shapeshift, which increases her arts and crit star generation rate by 10%, good for getting her NP and making stars for her allies. She also has Goddess Metamorphosis Gun, which gives her a passive 20% NP damage buff. This is a hell of a passive on her, even as a character who is more skill-oriented over NP spamming. That isn't to say that her NP is bad though. It is an AoE buster that first gives her a 20% attack buff for 1 turn and reduces the enemy's NP gauge by 1. It also gives the party at worst a 10% NP gauge battery at OC1. Something nice about this NP is that it is guaranteed NP reduction rather than being chance-based. This NP is honestly not anything insane, but is good nonetheless. Konyaskaya of Light is the dream servant of people who love buster memes. She exists as a servant meant for somewhat limited context, but excels in those contexts nonetheless. Let me explain. She is the buster support for short fights. You want to overwhelm whoever you are fighting as quickly as possible and spam out NPs that are normally not spammable. On the contrary, her direct competition is Merlin, who is built for more prolonged fights. That said, however, the pair work exceptionally well together, allowing for a great deal of damage output for whoever you are supporting, but for the most part you will want to pair Konyaskaya with another Konyaskaya and roid out a Buster unit. Some examples of servants that are budget that can work well in this context for, say, farming are Caster Ku and Avisbro, both of whom can then output some wild damage and just keep going. If you want to use them to support someone low rarity in a single target context, Mori and Bedivere are great choices. Konyaskaya has two major flaws that in truth do not matter if you use her in the 3-turn exclusive context. That is that she offers no survivability and her cooldowns are all very long, so realistically, longer content makes her fall off hard. But with that being her major issues, I believe that she is still an amazing unit. Touch the tail. So berserkers are difficult for me. I have biases towards some, namely Ku Alter, who was recently buffed, but I don't believe that he is the best. No. I believe that falls upon Morgan. Her direct competition in her role is Arjuna Alter, but I believe that she outpaces him if only by a few steps. Morgan is an AoE buster berserker that also offers some team support. She is an all-arounder that specializes in DPS, but let's take a look. Her first skill is a party-wide 20% attack buff for 3 turns that also increases her NP by 30% and then reduces the enemy's defense by 30% for 3 turns on a 6-turn cooldown. Essentially, for the wave that you are currently fighting, you are doing 50% bonus attack damage to them for 3 turns, while also charging Morgan's NP. Her second skill is very similar to Castoria's, but is slightly worse. It is a targetable 20% NP battery and increases their NP generation rate by 25% for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown. A skill that appears odd on a berserker, but can be used on herself or an ally depending on the context, making it a very versatile skill. Her third skill is a combination of offense and defense. It is a 3-turn guts that will res her with 3000 HP. It also gives her a 5000% star absorb for 3 turns, a 30% crit damage for 3 turns, a 15-star star bomb, and a self-regeneration buff that reduces the enemy's attack and crit chance by 20% for 1 turn, and then activates every turn for 3 turns. The regeneration bit is interesting in a good way. The idea behind it is that if the enemy can clear it for 1 turn, Morgan will put it back on them the following turn, more or less guaranteeing that they will stay debuffed for as long as possible. All in all, her skills are exceptional, but her NP gives her the competitive edge over her competition. It is an AoE buster NP that increases her damage against Knights of the Round and Fey enemies. Here is a list of the Knights, and now here is a list of the Fey. It does decent damage and then inflicts Curse for 1000 damage for 5 turns, then increases the party's overcharge by 1 for 1 time for 3 turns. Now, the initial damage on this NP is good, but where it excels is with the overcharge effect. A bonus 150% damage against man-type enemies, which we discussed earlier. That is enormous. She makes up for her lack of normal NP damage with all of the various bonus effects. She has the potential to go off as a DPS. She is capable of both acting as a DPS and as a pseudo-support, and she also offers a huge deal of debuffs against enemies, but honestly she works best utilizing all of this for herself. Berserkers are probably my favorite class in FGO because me brain small and me like hit big enemy with red card. Morgan lets you do this and more. She should undoubtedly be the berserker you bring to any fights against the round, but even outside of that, the fact that she deals 150 bonus damage to man-type enemies with her NP makes her insane. Support your local kudere and loving wife. Alright, for the extra classes, we're going to be doing this the same way as we did for the 4 stars, meaning that I'll be picking the top 3 from amongst the extra classes in no particular order. So, starting off we have Oberon. Oberon is a very unique servant in FGO because he was the very first Pretender class servant and is an amazing buster support. He can be used as a solid replacement for all of the other main caster supports, save for Waver if you want to use him in a farming or node clearing context. However, he is capable of dishing out some serious damage by himself as well. But let's take a look. First and foremost, he is a member of the ever-elusive Pretender class. This means that he does 1.5 damage against the Knight classes, 2 times damage to the Alter Ego class, half damage to Cavalry classes, and Foreigners deal 2 times damage to him, while taking half damage. The Berserkers are just Berserkers. This class finally gives us a way to deal with Alter Egos that isn't Berserkers or semi-awkward Knight setups, effectively completing the power triangle between Foreigners and Alter Egos, and now Pretenders. This immediately gives Oberon a competitive edge against his extra class competition, being a rare and unique servant. but his kit lives up to his elusive nature. His first skill is a party-wide NP battery for 20% that also increases the party's NP damage by 30% for 3 turns on a very short 5-turn cooldown. Characters that have a similar skill like this, your HPBs, Ass Claps, and Hikimoris, have a 6 or 7 turn cooldown and a slight effect attached to it like a debuff removal or star engines. 30% NP damage for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown with his particular playstyle and the battery is absolutely insane. But let's continue. His second skill is a targetable 50% NP battery that also creates 20 stars, but it comes with a demerit that's treated as a buff so that it cannot be debuff removed, that will reduce the target's NP gauge by 20% the following turn, all on a 6-turn cooldown. This skill is amazing, but somewhat tricky to use. You will want to use this on what you believe will be the final turn of a fight, or on a unit that doesn't really refund too much back to their NP. Alternatively, his first skill can alleviate this demerit outright. His third skill is where he becomes a bit more intense. It is a targetable 50% buster buff for 1 turn and grants them NP damage up boost for 1 turn. This buff is somewhat confusing, so let me see if I can put it in an easier to understand way. At max level, it essentially doubles the damage of the NP damage up buffs. So, if you use this in tandem with his first skill, rather than 30%, it will be 60%. Plus, this scales with all NP damage up buffs, so let's say theoretically that you're using an MLB Black Grail for an 80% NP damage up, the Spacesuit Mystic Code for a 50% damage up, and Oberon's first skill for 30% up, and you will be doing 320% NP damage up on an enemy. Use it on Mecha Ellie-chan and she'll do 440% because of her third skill. Before you get your hopes up though, this effect is not stackable with itself, meaning that you cannot do this in a double Oberon setup. The potential that this skill holds for that one enormous turn is huge, but then comes the demerit. With great power comes great nap time. After this one enormous turn, the target is put into a state of perma-sleep that cannot be switched out, gonged, or avoided. Off the top of my head, there aren't any servants that remove allies' buffs, or at the very least none that can remove one without the others, so this is virtually unavoidable. The one saving grace is that it does give them taunt, so hopefully they can be murked so that they can put in more fresh blood in there. Not to mention that it is on a very long 8-turn cooldown. This skill, much like the last, is meant for that one last punch. It is designed to roid out your character so that they can finish off the fight. Honestly, the Buster Up is nice and gives him a niche, but Oberon operates just fine as an all-around kind of support. He fills the void of providing NP batteries for your allies, but then we get to his own NP. It is an AoE Buster NP that removes offensive buffs from the enemy, inflicts the sleep status on them, and as a demerit grants them invincibility, and bonus OC damage against lawful enemies for 150%. Now, the turn of invincibility sounds really bad, but the sleep status operates like a stun that goes away once a character is hit. So the idea behind it is that you could follow this up with attacks to generate stars or NP while still maintaining the stun. So it's really just a trade-off of a stun for some damage. Oberon is complex. His kit is incredibly powerful but keeps certain checks in place. Despite this, he still operates well as a support. He somehow manages to bridge the gap between card types through his sheer amount of utility. He does work better in Buster teams, but that is only a small part of how much power he actually has. My one complaint with him is that they did not add a Tomacat-style sleeping animation for all the servants. Next up is Bazett, a character that I am fortunate enough to have in JP, and this may simply be a new servant bias. She is another very unique addition to the roster. I'll say this about her power level. She can 2-turn Beast Kiara if built with the best supports. Go watch Plushie Mistress do that because it is wild. But even outside of having the best of the best supports, Bazett holds her own. Let's take a look. Bazett's first skill is a 3-turn buff to her Quick Buster crit and caster class damage for 30% on a 6-turn cooldown. A solid buff that gives her an edge against caster class enemies, which is always good. Her second skill is a 50% NP battery, 1 turn of star absorption for 500%, and 1 turn of increased crit damage by a massive 100%, all on a 6-turn cooldown. This buff plays very nicely with how her NP operates, but we will get into that here in a bit. Her third skill is an evade for 1 turn, debuff immunity for 1 turn, and a 20-star star bomb on a 5-turn cooldown. All of her skills, when used together, result in her NP absolutely exploding. But before we get into that, we need to explain a special passive that allows her to operate. It is a skill called God's Holder Tradition Carrier that gives her a flat 5% buff to her crit damage, but also extends the effect of her offensive buffs so that they expire after the enemy's turn rather than at the end of the player's. So, her buffs do not vanish before her NP is able to utilize them. She also has an A-rank riding skill, which increases her quick cards by a flat 10%, which is very nice for her. But her NP is her main selling point. It creates a counter that is unaffected by NP seal, debuff removal, or buff block, provides her with a taunt, and gains 10 crit stars. The way how it works is that if Bazett is attacked or targeted by a skill that the enemy uses, she will respond with a one-hit quick attack. If you've played Darkest Dungeon, the effect is pretty much identical to how Repost works in that game. This hit deals 600% damage at NP1 and is further buffed with a 10% attack buff at OC1. This hit will also inflict a quick resist down by 10% for 3 turns every time a counter is activated. Note that in the case of break bars, this NP is unable to break them. It will always leave them at 1 HP. Also note that if she dies, she does not activate her counter. Finally, you cannot commit Bazett on Bazett violence with an infinite loop of counters. Her NP is easily the best part about her. But outside of that, she is still an amazing crit unit. Her quick cards have 6 hits on them and she has decent NP gain, so while making stars for herself, she's able to get her NP, use her NP, deal a metric ton of damage, and then still be able to crit more. Her kit also provides her with all of the tools that she needs, from stars on demand to damage buffs to an evade to help not die when her NP is active. She has it all. I am struggling to genuinely find a flaw for her design. Maybe a lack of guts, but funny enough, her Bond CE gives her NP damage up by 30% as well as guts, that reses her with a 20% HP. Note that NP damage up affects the damage on her counter, and is not a wasted skill on her. She does a lot as a DPS alter ego, and is a welcome addition to the Chaldea Office Lady Club. Finally, we have another alter ego, the humming man himself, Ashia Doman. Perhaps the least confident of my picks, but after using him a fair deal and reviewing him against his competition, I think he deserves to be among the top 10. Doman is weird, to say the least, but he's a powerful DPS support hybrid nonetheless. He operates in the realm of evil. Dude loves to be evil and be surrounded by evil, but let's look into it. His first skill is a myriad of AoE debuffs for the enemy. These include an attack down for 20% for 3 turns, a defense down for 30% for 3 turns. It then has some chance-based effects in the Terror status, which has a 40% chance to proc once every turn for 3 turns until its activation, and Confusion, which has a 30% chance to skill seal every turn. Then, to top it off, it inflicts Curse on the enemy for 500 damage for 3 turns, all on a 6-turn cooldown. His second skill is a 2x Guts that lasts 5 turns and will res him with 3000 HP. This also increases the crit damage of all evil allies by 50%, then chaotic allies by 50% for 3 turns, all on a 7-turn cooldown. The cooldown on this one is rough, but the effect is incredibly powerful. It gives himself and like-minded allies 100% crit damage for 3 turns and offers solid survivability to himself as well. But he isn't done with his type of support yet either. His third skill is an 80% NP battery that also increases the attack of evil allies by 20% and chaotic allies by 20% for 3 turns, then slaps 2000 curse damage on all enemies for 5 turns, again on a 7-turn cooldown. This makes Doman a premier support for chaotic evil allies, while also being insanely powerful as a DPS in his own right. Now, all of these curses may seem like just add-ons, and in a way they are. The dots is a relatively weak aspect of the game, but Doman manages to use them well thanks to his NP. It is an AoE quick NP that also puts 1000 curse damage on all the enemies for 5 turns, and has a 120% chance to insta-kill the enemy. It also puts Disastrous Curse on them that scales with OC, but at worst is 100%. Doman is amazing. He is one of the few servants that can wield curse damage effectively thanks to how well he can use his NP and how often he can fire it off. He provides amazing support to chaotic evil servants. Here is a list of all of them. Notable among these is Moriarty, who can make his allies evil if he needs to. But as you can see, there are a lot of them, so in a way, he's limited in who he can support, but in the same vein, you wouldn't bring a spoon to open a wine bottle. His niche, while limited, still consists of very powerful servants, many of which very much benefit from the bonus crit damage in specific, like Gorgon, Vlad III, and Jalter. He's also capable of creating the stars necessary for these characters to crit as well, as he is a multi-hit quick servant with decent star generation. He is yet another of these extra class servants that is simply flexible in the roles that he plays. Oftentimes, not having a fully clear-cut role as a DPS or as a support is detrimental to a servant's usability, but in the case of Doman, it just makes him flexible. Well, hell, he can even be able to solo if you need him to thanks to his double guts. He is honestly a breath of fresh air when it comes to supports, and his abilities are all very well rounded for him as a character. The only real issue that he has is the long cooldowns on his second and third skills. His damage and capabilities somewhat drop after that. But do you know who is an evil support who can help him with that? Tamamo. Just summon hurt from a friend and watch your servants go. I enjoy the hot clown. Now we are once again left with the daunting task of how best to order these characters. All of them are absolutely amazing, so please do not kill me when I say that one is worse than the other. I would like to point something out about this list I'm sure that some of you have noticed. Save for Ozzy and Super Orion, none of these characters exist on NA yet. As FGO has aged, it has been pushing the limit of what they have believed was broken further and further ahead. In effect, this list will be likely somewhat obsolete by the time that we get all of these servants on NA. You know, unless they just keep bogarting the busted riders. So, let's begin our ordering. These characters will be ordered primarily based on their usability, niches, and how often they can be realistically brought to a fight. I will not go nearly into as much detail in these descriptions because this is the 17th page of the script. I will also offer an honorable mention for the potential alternative to them. Again, this will be an identical setup to the previous video, so let's get started. I would like to start this off by saying once again that all of these servants are phenomenal. So being placed as the 10th out of all of the 5 stars is not me spitting in their face and calling you stupid for liking them. Someone has to be the worst of the best, and that title belongs to our number 10, Ozymandias. While Ozzy is a phenomenal DPS with support capabilities, to utilize his kit to its fullest potential, he has to be on the sunny side of life. While his kit does alleviate that demerit within itself, the fact that it is tied to his NP is where it becomes tricky. While Ozzy is able to use his NP with a fair amount of consistency, having an extra effect tied to a battlefield state is never a good look. Mind you, sunlight is fairly common. The other issue is that his NP does not hit particularly hard compared to other members of his class. For example, and this could just be usage bias on my part, both Ushi and Kintoki hit harder with their NPs. Again though, Ozzy offers a great deal more to a team as well, but you can definitely feel his age when you compare him to newer servants. For his honorable mention, I want to say that it's Reynez. Reynez could very easily overtake him in this position. However, I have a very strong bias against rider supports, but I cannot deny how good Reynez actually is. Targetable and AoE NP gauge batteries, as well as a targetable invincibility, and an NP that just allows berserkers to exist super well is very, very good. I just don't think it's as good as Ozzy, but she's still a phenomenal unit. Number 9 is Doman. While I love him, he is set deeply into his niche as a support for chaotic evil enemies. While he can definitely work outside of that context, clearly, as he is on this list, he definitely prefers to be in it. Now, while I love the Hot Clown, he is unfortunately outpaced by his competition here because of his long cooldowns. Legitimately, if his second and third skills were on a 6-turn cooldown, he'd be much better. While Tamamo does alleviate this, bringing her further throws him into a niche, making him less usable in more contexts. He is still an amazing unit though. An honorable mention for an extra class support unit is Dark Beacon. She too has a set niche, being a buster and beast support. Mind you, the beast thing doesn't come up very often. When I say beast, I mean wild beast. But her buster and NP support is great, plus her NP is quite powerful as well. I think Mekon of Light is better than Mekon of Dark for the most part, but Mekon of Dark is still very powerful. Number 8 is Super Orion. While he is easily one of the best DPS servants in the game and able to sustain himself fairly well, he is not without flaws. Namely, his damage falls off when his skills aren't active. He excels at amazing buster crit damage when his skills are active, but while he is not under the influence of his NP or skills, his damage is just fine. Mind you, he picks up his own slack fairly well, able to generate good NP, and his cooldowns are far from hateful. He still stands out as a solid unit and befitting of being called a Grand. For honorable mentions for the Archer class, I would say Archer Artoria takes the cake. I think an argument could be made that she outpaces Super Orion because she so easily is able to spam out her NP. This is definitely not a bias on my part, having her since the first month of playing. Regardless, she is stupidly powerful and my go-to archer in most cases, but Orion's damage output pushes her above her just ever so slightly. Number 7 is Morgan. Morgan is a DPS with support capabilities, making her powerful and versatile. However, her lack of hard survival outside of a single guts is somewhat troublesome, especially for a berserker. Even more so that it only lasts 3 turns, and more often than not you're going to want to use this skill for the other effects that are all very powerful. But outside of that, she can be somewhat squishy and not in the good way. Mind you, this is easily alleviated through proper team comms, but is still worth pointing out. Her honorable mention is Argent Altar, who does essentially the same thing as her, but is more geared towards self-sustain than NP and multiple debuffs. What they share is their ability to be powerful AoE crit zergers. Honestly, they are somewhat interchangeable in their usability, but I personally favor Morgan after playtesting both against each other. Number 6 is Bazett. Being one of the most recent servants to be released as of the creation of this video, Bazett still has much to prove in the way of usability. The Alter Ego class has some incredibly powerful servants in their roster, so to say that a newcomer is the best of them is perhaps a bit presumptuous on my part. But after testing her out for a while now against her direct competition, i.e. Melt, I think Bazett wins out. Her unique playstyle and skills that gel perfectly together make her a powerhouse. She is another that benefits from having decent supports, but even without them she is still amazing. As mentioned, Melt is her honorable mention. Melt still stands as an incredible alter ego who fulfills more or less the same job as Bazett. She is an incredibly powerful single-target quick servant geared towards crits and NP damage. Melt is amazing for her ability to make stars, fire off her NP, and then go hard on the crit damage thanks to her second skill. Despite this, I still believe that Bazett does all of this and more, also without reducing her team's NP damage. Number 5 is Melusine. Her ability to go from 0 to 100 is amazing for an AoE Lancer. She is almost a perfect DPS unit, but she suffers from one issue in her role. Her third skill is a dead one if you want to retain her single target art status. While her first two skills are certainly powerful enough to make up for this, it is still an issue worth mentioning. She is a great servant and can fill both roles that you want out of her, but her third skill being one and done in this way is truly unfortunate. She also has no hard survivability, which honestly for her is not so bad because she's not built for longer fights anyway, more of a hit it and quit it type of servant. In honorable mentions we have Romulus Kiernes, a powerful AoE buster unit who is ironically the best partner to Boudica. Where he goes, Rome follows, and with Rome comes debuffs for the enemy, buffs for the party, and a myriad of DPS support options. He is an extremely powerful unit who I look forward to coming soon on NA. Number 4 is Oberon. I enjoy how he is meant to be played and love that he is another all-arounder kind of like Waver, though he does favor Buster Team. But the fact that his insane utility can seriously hurt his allies should not be ignored. This makes him very good in his live fast, sleep hard type playstyle, but outside of that, he's just not really usable. That said, he still stands near the top of the support chain for his capabilities. The best extra class support after him is probably Jean, who has really come into her own in recent years, no longer stunning herself and now clearing debuffs and reducing defense for the enemy. She has gotten much better, but I don't feel like I can even really compare them, so just take Dark Beacon as the honorable mention here as well. Number 3 is Light Mekon, an amazing Buster support unit that can enable some ridiculous damage for Berserkers and other Buster-centric units. In fact, pairing a double of her with Orion makes her some wild, nonsensical crit damage. But we aren't reviewing this on that. I said it before and I will say it again. She is like Merlin, but for people who live on speed. Praise be to Buster memes. As for her honorable mention, Kama takes the cake. Kama, while not a support, does have support capabilities and is the best DPS assassin in the game. She also works in the context of Charm Walk and Star Generation. An incredible unit, but not a clever little fox. Number 2 is Muramasa. I cannot stress enough how powerful he is. His ability to self-sustain and fire off his NP over and over and over again is insane. They went all out on his kit, making him capable of just clearing the universe. He stands above and beyond all other sabers in terms of his damage output. His one issue is that he cannot tank NPs on his own, so pairing him with someone to protect him is a good idea. Alternatively, just ramping up his damage so that he doesn't even need to be protected as well, that works. His honorable mention is difficult because of the massive power gap. So this pick is not with much confidence and honestly falls into a tie in my mind between Saber Okitan and Nero Bride. Okitan's kit is an AoE quick that removes defensive buffs and is focused on creating and using her stars while buffing her crit damage. Nero Bride is an exceptionally powerful support all around but works best in arts teams. She has been able to be used since her inception and I'm glad to see that even in JP she can still shine through. Finally, our number 1 pick, and to the surprise of absolutely nobody, is Castoria. She does it all. She is such an enormously powerful servant that it is amazing that she exists in the first place. She does not have any notable flaws in her design, and enables so much nonsense that it isn't even funny. She is simply amazing at what she does, and by far the best caster in the game, and debatably, the best servant overall. For her honorable mention, I would have to say that it's Waver. Not as flashy as the others, but used as a constant battery for almost every single comp that utilizes the top tier supports just as a pick-me-up. It's never bad to have a waiver on your team. While Merlin and Scotty are better in terms of full-on kits and looping, I think that the fact that you see waiver in so many team comps across the board speaks for itself in terms of his usability. So, for those of you on NA right now, if you don't have waiver, pick him up with the SSR ticket and save all the cores that you have right now for Castoria. It's going to be a strong year for casters. But that is it! 21 pages of script and a ruined voice and at least 1,000 angry people in the books. Thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. Like the videos, it really does help out the channel. Subscribe to catch these as they go up. Follow my Twitch for significantly less structured content. Join the Discord, link down below. I also have a Twitter, but for now, keep your chin up. Peace.